We're traveling down Highway 90, the road most traveled, the strip of blacktop that knits together the music and culture from Houston to Jacksonville. I'm Charles Chamberlain of the Louisiana State Museum, and this time we're stopping in my hometown, New Orleans, to learn about the music of the traditional New Orleans brass bands.
Well, I said, call him up, call him up. Oh, just call him up, yeah.
New Orleans is one of the few American cities with an active brass band tradition and culture. And 100 years ago, most cities in America had brass bands, but then they gradually died out. In New Orleans, they remained active, and I believe it's because we love a parade in New Orleans. A parade in New Orleans is a public music event where everyone dances and has a good time, and that's where you find the brass band, on the street. These days, one of the swingingest, funkiest brass bands out there is the Treme Brass Band.
My name is Benny Jones Sr. I'm the leader of the Treme Brass Band in New Orleans, Louisiana. My band called the Treme Brass Band because I'm born and raised in the Treme area, and I named my band after the neighborhood I was born and raised in. Well, the history of brass band, when I learned from a kid, was started in the military. And the band I played right behind the soldiers, that's where the brass band got the name, second line. And when it got in the street, they were playing marching music. So when they got to the streets, they changed the beat of the music, would put the New Orleans beat in it, putting the street beat on the bass drum, and which a snare drum would tie into it, and that's how it come to be a second line brass band. One of the famous places you can find that music, you come to the Treme. They got a young brass band playing all the time, all hours of the night. They'll be playing in the parks. They'll be playing at the Backstreet Culture Museum, at St. Augusta Church. You can also catch them in Congo Square at a certain time of year. They have performance with the brass band playing New Orleans music.
One of the most unique traditions in New Orleans is the funeral with music, otherwise known as a jazz funeral. Now, 100 years ago or so, lots of ethnic groups in the United States celebrated funerals with music, especially in the Catholic Church, and including Germans, Italians, Irish, and African Americans. But while it died out in the rest of the United States around 1900, they remained popular in New Orleans, especially in the African American community, where they gained their own protocol and procedure. Now, in the procedure, the band accompanies the deceased body from the church to the cemetery playing a dirge. And they plant the body in the cemetery, the drummer gives a roll, and then they break into an up-tempo jazz swing spiritual song. The band parades through the neighborhood, and they celebrate the life of the deceased.
When you see a New Orleans traditional jazz funeral, that's when the musicians wear the black pants or black tie and the black band hat, and they're playing hymns and dirges. Closer walk with thee, in the sweet by and by, precious Lord. That is funeral music. If you're playing for an older person, you're looking for a straight-out traditional jazz funeral. And when you're playing for younger people, well, today they'll ask for the up-tempo music. They're not too much into the older music, so they'll hire a young band, and they do the real up-tempo music for the funeral. The music I'm here right now is from Mr. Danny Barker. Mr. Danny Barker really important to the music industry, especially with the brass band.
Danny Barker revitalized the brass band scene for a new generation. He was a jazz musician who was born and raised in New Orleans. He left in the 1930s to move to New York, where he made it big as a jazz guitarist. And when he returned to New Orleans in the 1960s, he started the Fairview Baptist Brass Band, where he trained a new generation in the repertoire and traditions of New Orleans brass band music. He essentially passed the torch on to a new generation of kids who went on to lead their own brass bands. One of the bands that came out of that was the Dirty Dozen Brass Band.
I started the Dirty Dozen Brass Band, and I put that band together, and we're doing sort of modern music. We want to try to change the music around. It was sort of dying out because older guy was still playing the traditional music, and we figured we could come to the scene with a different kind of music, put a new flavor to some of the music, and bring a different atmosphere to the street and see what it worked. So when we came out to Dirty Dumb, we started doing modern tunes, different kind of tunes, that Night Train and some of Miles Davis tunes. And cats said, that's not going to work on the street because people don't want to hear that and blah, blah, blah. But I'm going, you never know what's going to happen until you put it out there on the street. And Dirty Dumb really got famous for playing the music we playing today.
Katrina was a huge blow to New Orleans street culture. Most of the neighborhoods where brass band musicians lived were severely flooded, and they lost everything. The Treme Brass Band is no exception. Treme neighborhood behind the French Quarter was flooded, and those guys ended up all over.
Well, we got scattered all over. I left, and I went to from New Orleans to Baton Rouge to Lafayette to Dallas, Texas. Some of my musicians wound up in Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Baton Rouge. And they were scattered out like a checkerboard. So when I got to Dallas, I had a friend of mine call me, said he got a gentleman up here in Arizona wants to put the band together and give us some work. It took me about 2 weeks to find out where everyone was. And then what happened, they started calling me back and find out where everybody was. And I said, well, I have a guy want to take us to Arizona, give us some work if y'all willing to go, So we got to Arizona. I said, you got to get us some clothes, get us some instruments. I said, we don't have no instruments and no clothes. So we went up there and started working people, started giving benefits, and people started helping us out. We wound up in Arizona about 4 months.
After Katrina, as the bands have returned to New Orleans, the tradition that Danny Barker revitalized continued. Kids are taking up brass band instruments and bands are reforming. Younger brass bands integrate funk, bebop, and even hip-hop. The Soul Rebels is one of the bands that have helped pioneer this style.
Take some fellas, take some, come on. Take some fellas, take some ladies, take some, come on. Take some.
Benny Jones says you can hear the mix of modern and traditional at almost any New Orleans street parade.
See, for instance, I play in the Young Men's Olympic Parade. I'm the lead of the band. They like traditional music. Right behind me, they have another traditional band. In the back, they have a modern music. Got a young band. They play the up-tempo music. They like the Rebirth music. They play that up-tempo music. And then might have the Soul Rebels on the parade too. So everybody playing a variety of music on the parade. You got about 5 or 6 bands on that parade.
Fellas, grab ya. You like hip-hop, ladies, rub ya. You like hip-hop, gotcha.
Thanks for listening. I'm Charles Chamberlain of the Louisiana State Museum for Arts Edge, a program of the Education Department of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts.